Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Raya and the Last Dragon. Now, this is a rare action-adventure kind of movie from Disney Animation, although they do that sometimes. They don't do it very often. And it's the 59th feature from Disney Animation as well, and the first original film they've had in about 4 years and a couple months. It plays very differently than we've seen from a lot of their recent stuff, and I think a lot of their stuff in general, it feels very Avatar: The Last Airbender inspired. It's very influenced on being set in a very Southeast Asian setting, although many years ago, so you can't get a specific country or anything like that. I think it is a welcome difference, and especially in the newer age of Disney animation. They don't do a lot of non-song movies, and when they do, they can, Zootopia is different, but still is very much done in the kind of Disney kind of character design, furry creature kind of thing. But doing action adventure stuff like this, other than Big Hero 6, which is probably the last time they did it, from the same director, Don Hall, I think this is probably a lot better of a one than Big Hero 6 at least, and at least seems to understand the basic storytelling of it, although I do think in some ways this film felt like something that might have worked better in a television setting or something like that. That might be because the two screenwriters are more known for television writing than screenwriting, although Adele Lim did help adapt Crazy Rich Asians, and the other screenwriter whose name I think is Kwai Negan. I hope that's how you say it. I apologize if I mispronounced it. Although it feels a little more television inspired, and maybe it kind of does remind me a lot of various kind of Quest TV shows. They do their best to kind of make this in maybe, I guess, a feature film format for the most part. This is about various different tribes in the Kumadra region, and they're each named after a different part of the Kumadra Dragon, which is a river in there, which I didn't realize when I was watching it, which should be obvious with names like Fang, Heart, Fang, Heart, Spine, Talon, and Tail. So, that kind of works in a very kid action adventure way. They're very divided, but they're trying to bring them together until Raya is deceived by a rival tribe to show this orb in their tribe that has all the power of these dragons who destroyed the Dun, who are these evil kind of creatures that make people into stone. It happened a long time ago, but this orb was protecting them, and then these tribes fight over it and break it up. These evil creatures come back, and she has to find the last dragon, who's voiced by Awkwafina, to hopefully defeat these creatures again. I hope I described that right. It's a little complicated, I will say, which is, I think, not the best thing for a Disney animated film. I don't know if that necessarily worked, and I will say, I think Paleo said in his review this would work better for a video game, or this would work better, everyone said, for a TV show, which I do agree. I think there's a lot to flesh out here, which this feature is just not 100% great at doing. But one thing that I think, a lot of people have said, showing that you shouldn't be, entirely so selfish or trusting of people. I think, honestly, really what this film is about is nationalism, and how that's been a huge problem in sort of the Trump era. This is very much, like I've said many times, when a filmmaker is, or a studio or whomever is trying to have a film set in the past, it's not really about the past as much as it is about the present and why they're adapting it now. And Raya the Last Dragon is very much about that. Once we've had a huge rise in nationalism, which is sort of hopefully ending, because nationalism is a great way to have pride in something you have absolutely nothing to do with. I mean, it is. It's just for people who don't accomplish things to make themselves feel great. That's very much it is. You have these warring tribes. They all need a piece of the orb. They basically sort of almost destroy the world over their nationalist views, and how when you have this whole group of people who Raya brings together, who are from these other factions who help with the Last Dragon trying to get the orb back together. I guess I finally described the plot. It shows you how like working together is much better in the end, which I think is a great lesson for kids specifically, but I'd also say for most people, sadly, which I think that part of the movie works really well, and it does it in a way that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, how it's mainly about nationalism. How this film is probably a little more political than you realize, but which I think this film hides fairly well, actually. What I thought was interesting is how different of a vibe this film has, and I know this is probably the most reflective we have had of the new creative team that's happening over at Disney since Lasseter left. I'm sure this was developed when he was still there, because these films are developed for so long. In terms of having Don Hall co-directed this with Carlos Lopez Estrada, who helped direct Blind Spotting, who I don't know has too much background in animation, but Blind Spotting was a very kind of different feature film, and is written by Kwai Negan, who has written everything from dramas to Peg and Cat, I believe. Is very eclectic in terms of her writing resume, as well as Adele Lim. You can kind of tell this is sort of done by people who, the Disney Animation Studio is a well-honed machine, and you get that it's very well done, and the character designs, and it's operating as the machine it should, but it's kind of melded in a different way. I don't know if I love some of the choices. Like, overall, I think this is a good movie, and I think it is actually the kind of film that kids who love Disney animation and will get into animation will kind of like obsess over because of it, how different it is, how I'm sure it's like feels like more mature when you're a little kid and stuff like that. But certain choices that I'm assuming there were more Don Halls, but I don't know whose it was. They use like these beautiful backgrounds and these settings and cool weapons and world building and all that stuff very well. But then there's certain times where they would have the characters in the foreground and the background be completely out of focus, or like blurry and stuff like that. And usually when you have an epic, traditionally like a live action epic, you'd want to show that because you spend a lot of money and you flew everyone out there and stuff, and you'd kind of want to show it off because it's like an amazing setting. And especially in animation, that's like probably a month of someone's life that you've just paid them a lot to do. And I'm not saying you should keep that because of those like monetary factors, but that's usually the way you do it. And although I did find that very interesting, and they clearly thought about like, well, all these films do that, why don't we do this? I still was like not in love with that. I kind of was like, that's interesting, and it pops in a certain way that I think this film would actually look good in 3D, which is not something I thought I'd say about a 2021 movie. It's just like, I think when you think of having an Asian setting for an epic, I think of someone like Jennifer Yi Nelson, who directed the Kung Fu Panda movies. I think she moves the camera well and shows off those locations in such a beautiful way. I still prefer that. I know this is artistically a different way to do it, and I respect that. I actually think that's cool because epics are kind of standard in how you shoot them. Even if it looks amazing and epic and makes your jaw drop, it's like you almost feel like, yeah, I get it. I appreciate they took a different cinematography eye to it. I just was like, it didn't excite me. It was just like, I get that you want me to focus on these characters, and you've literally made that very clear the way you did it, but I'd prefer to see the cool backgrounds as well. And maybe part of me was like, did they just do that to cover their asses because of COVID? If they did, good job. But if not, I don't know if I love that artistic decision. But what I think really works about it is it's very captivating. You do have the team, which I saw Don Hall's last film, Big Hero 6, recently, and the team in that felt like it was more about Hero, and the team was like sort of an afterthought. They're all kind of like science people, like they're distinct in terms of like they're different people, but it didn't feel distinct enough. In this, like when I look at a poster or something of this or an ad, I'm reminded of each of the characters because they are so different. When you have like this large older warrior guy, when you have a baby, when you have a bunch of monkeys, when you have a kid who's a chef, when you have Tuk Tuk, you remember all of them because they are visually distinctive. They are not the same at all, and so they all like pop out in a certain way. And I think that's also like what works about when you have these teams, whether you have X-Men or like X-Men when you have a diverse amount of people, not like usually when they just put a bunch of white people in it, but in good X-Men, or Star Wars, or Lord of the Rings, you have like different sizes are different, body shapes are different, things like that. And I think that like adds visually to you immediately differentiating the team because there's no way you could confuse any of those people, which I think is really cool actually. I think maybe he might have learned his lesson from Big Hero 6 because I don't remember all those people. I sort of do, but not entirely. In this, I very much remember them all in different ways, and it felt very distinctive. And I thought team-wise, like I would absolutely see an entire show of this. And I actually think like this is like one of the first movies they made, like Big Hero 6, I felt like, oh, they're gonna make a sequel or a show, whatever. This excites me. I almost think you could readapt this. Like, I think this is like a pilot or something like that. Or you could do like the years she has off until she goes and finds the thing. But those elements really work. But there were certain times where like we're getting info dumps. Like the setup is like, okay, so a long time ago there's this thing, and then like 500 years later we're now, but that's also a flashback, and then you get to the movie. Like the amount of flashbacks you have until you get to like the movie is like 20 minutes or something. You're going through hundreds of years and all this stuff. Like, can we just like get it to, I understand it was necessary, but I don't think they did it in the best way. I noticed they had the kind of shadow puppets thing, which I know is something in Southeast Asian culture. I also think it was very Prince Ahmed inspired because like all those people have probably been showed Prince Ahmed. I'm not trying to just show it because I know animation history and stuff. I'm saying like I got hints at them using that and using this, which I thought was actually interesting. And visually it's like a very smart movie, and I actually like Disney messing around with different creative teams in this. I think it was rewarded in a good movie. They're like kind of simple flaws where it's like, you know, they did rush certain things at the beginning, but then when you get into like the heart of the movie, which is Raya finding these pieces, bringing them back together with the last dragon, then it really like sang and stuff like that. And I liked Awkwafina. I like Kelly Marie Tran. I think Awkwafina worked really well within this film. She's basically playing a Disney sidekick, but she's sort of, other than The Farewell and Crazy Rich Asian, she's sort of a Disney sidekick too. So in terms of like, she's like the comedic sidekick in most of the stuff. She like naturally is very good at that part, so it works really well. I think this is probably in that weird strain of action adventure Disney films, and it's, I think, really good at it actually. I really liked it in those terms, but I feel like this is kind of a vein of film from Disney that is sort of like Black Hole or Tron, where it's like almost like a mainstream cult movie, and I don't know if those films ever like break out as much, or you're more in awe at like the amount of money they spent on it, like the visual difference kind of thing. Like James Newton Howard does this, and I think he's done like Dinosaur, Treasure Planet, and also Atlantis: The Last Empire. It seems like that vein of film. I like a lot of those movies, and I find that, and I'm glad Disney is doing different things, because they're a studio that, as an animation studio, they're not known for doing different kind of films. And I'm glad they've opened up more, but I'm more like appreciating it for that. I did think it was a fairly good animated film. Like, I liked it probably a lot more than a lot of people did, because I think it was a darker action adventure that still played well for the whole family, which I think is a harder thing to do. It gets into loss, although that, I don't know, some people will say, oh, it's like about COVID, or it's just, you know, the Avengers Infinity War Endgame thing again, which I was like, all right, cool. I mean, they even take the same amount of years off. Like, what's going on with that? Did you guys know something, or this is like a plot point you really are inspired by? I don't know. I think it becomes about COVID, but if COVID didn't happen, we'd just be like, why did you use the Endgame thing again? I don't get it. Very weird. And I don't know if it teaches people the right lesson about death, that people are just gone for 5 years and then come back. That's not like how death works. I don't know if you guys know that, but maybe we shouldn't be doing that, because, like, you know, having an actual plague, like, people don't come back, and I think that would be maybe represent a little bit more. I understand it's like an all audience kind of kids movie, and you don't want to be that heavy, but at the same time, like, if you are saying this big lesson about nationalism, which we very much need, I think now is a good time to talk about death as well, so that might have been a little better. And there's certain things like that logistically I wish they had kind of brought out more. I know Disney does not like to get into like killing characters hardcore like that, so, you know, that's their thing. But I like how different this film was. Much I like how those are, but you're more looking at these films in terms of their juxtaposition with, you know, the oeuvre of Disney. But I think in terms of like a big epic movie, I still think this is a very good one, and I mainly like the different version it's presenting to you. You know, you don't get those sort of things. I like, you know, I've heard people call her the Elsa dragon, which I totally get. This is something that I think they, in a way, bit off a little bit more than they can chew. I think this would have worked way better as a TV show. I wonder sometimes, should a company look at the story and go like, what would be the best way to tell this story, rather than going like, we have to put the most money into features? Like, should we just look at what would be the best way to tell a story, rather than to make a story be a feature just because it's a feature? Would this have not worked better as a Disney Plus show, and just have the money that you're going to spend on a feature film? I think that might have been maybe a better idea. Maybe that's something that's going to happen with the new streaming era. But as for what this is, and what it is as a whole, I really liked it. I think it is a really good kind of action adventure family film. It can get a little scary and darker. My daughter got a little scared at some parts, not like, you know, too scared or traumatized or anything like that. It's a little more serious than a lot of Disney stuff is, but I think, you know, the morals you get from it, other than the death thing, about nationalism, I think are fairly necessary right now. I think kind of trying to tell this sort of, you know, after Avatar: The Last Airbender, everyone from Thundercats to Disney wanted to do a similar one. And I think this is probably one of the better attempts at that, really, to tell that kind of like larger story of like fighting nations and everything like that. But it also is a world that you very much get into and has interesting developments and twists in it. And there's a real rich world to this film, and it makes you kind of want to get into it. I think a lot of their films have these rich worlds, but I can't think of one I've wanted to get into as much as this one. I just think they might have been a little more concerned in having a film that felt a little more contained in a film itself than a film that made you question, like, hey, what are they going to do with the TV show or whatever, is not like the strongest in terms of narrative, and kind of shows like the film's narrative weaknesses more than its strengths. And it does actually have a lot of strengths to it, and it did actually, I think, try to present things differently, which when you end with a lot of these Disney action adventure films, you almost like respect them for being what they are a little bit more than liking them. But I'd say I'm at even levels of both on this film. An animated film, I think that is probably a must-see in the Disney catalog, and I would say kind of this era, one that really like kind of sticks out to me in a very pleasant way, even if this being a feature film might not have been the best idea. So if you have seen Raya and the Last Dragon and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.